much. No break. All right, I better keep y'all engaged. But you know what that means? We get lunch sooner, so that's a good thing. And the food has been amazing here. I just want to say, I have the amazing opportunity to go to conferences a lot. And this one is so special. I have been fed and fueled by my colleagues that have also presented up here over the last day and a half, and I'm so humbled and grateful to share a stage with them. I've also been fed so much by my conversations with you all. I really feel the joy of the fact that at this conference, we've had so much opportunity to engage with one another, and I am learning so much from the experience in the room, and so I thank you for that as we get started on this conversation about really leading through conflict in polarized times. So I'm with an organization called the National Conflict Resolution Center, and if you don't know us, we are 40 years old. We were founded in 1983, and I had the pleasure yesterday of sitting in the back of the room with our friends visiting us from South Korea. If you haven't met them yet, please make sure that you do. And Kevin said, National Conflict Resolution Center. So, like policy, diplomacy, what do you all do? And so we had a great conversation about the fact that, some of that plays into what we do, but at our roots, what we really do is we mediate. So when there is active conflict, we get in there and we help resolve it. We facilitate, meaning we facilitate conversations that are very, very hard. Sometimes those are school board meetings. Sometimes those are county board of governments meetings. Sometimes those are town halls within a company that's going through a lot of change. We facilitate conversations that are very difficult. And I would say almost most importantly, we train. We work to equip leaders and equip people at all levels of organizations to be able to manage conflicts, to manage the state that we're in as a society and manage difficult conversations better. And we're in a unique place, aren't we, as a society, not just in workplaces, but all over the place. I've worked at NCRC for 18 years, and I will tell you, 18 years ago when I started this work, I have this wonderful, bombastic uncle, as we all should, and we all probably do. Everyone has a bombastic uncle. And he kind of is a bit of a cynic, and he would say to me like, oh, that's sweet, honey. Conflict resolution, peace building, that's lovely, good job. And it was honestly a little demeaning. Like it just felt like such a lofty goal, right, to be in conflict resolution. And that same uncle now comes to me and we have conversations and I see the look of desperation in his eyes as he says, what are we going to do? The world is tough out there. We can't disagree anymore. We're not able to do it. How are we going to move forward? And so in my almost 2 decades of work in conflict resolution, I've really seen it change a lot. And in workplaces, we've seen that same impact. So one of the questions that we get all the time is, how did we get here? I mean, how did we get to this place where we have forgotten the art of disagreement? Because everyone in this room knows we have to have diverse thoughts and opinions at the table in order to have the best teams, right? We need to be able to disagree. It's not only a foundation of our country's principles and what democracy stands for, but it is a foundational principle of a good workplace, is having different ideas. But we've forgotten how to do that in a way that's constructive. And so we're asked all the time, how did we get here? Well, here's my answer. Wah, wah. Obviously, we can't blame 2020 for everything, obviously. And we were seeing kind of a decrease in civility, respect, rhetoric way before 2020. We were on a trajectory that was not good. And we were seeing it in our media, we were seeing it on social media, we were seeing it in the halls of Congress and in Washington, D.C. So we knew that things were getting kind of worse in the sense of how people were at least exemplifying a dialogue, and we really changed from ever having dialogue to more having these heated debates. But 2020 did something very unique to us all. In the pandemic, we were all sent home. And so what happened is we stopped having any uncomfortable conversations. For the most part, and not for all of us, but for the most part, the people in our homes felt generally similarly to how we do on a lot of issues in the world. And so we were sent home and we stopped going to choir practice and PTA meetings and, a place of worship where you may hear other things, or gosh, even airport bars. That's a great place to have some, political conversations. But we stopped having that input. And because of technology, and there are so many great things about technology, but because of technology and the fact that algorithms fed us the information we wanted to hear, we were getting news feeds that confirmed what we thought. And so we really stopped hearing the other side. And what that made us do is believe that whoever didn't think like us was fringe, was extreme. And we lost that art of disagreement. And 2020 was a really tough year to do that. We've talked about it a lot already in this conference, but we had a major racial justice movement in our country after the murder of George Floyd. And that was a really difficult time to be home, because if you were supporting one side of it, you were getting all the information that confirmed that and all the information that supported it. And if you were on the other side of it, the exact opposite was happening. And again, we were seeing each other as extreme. The same thing was happening around COVID policies. There was so much division about the development of vaccines, what the rollout would look like. Are our children in school? Should they be in school? Shouldn't they be in school? We were fearful for our lives. We were feeling life and death, and yet we weren't talking to anyone, generally, who had a different opinion than us, even slightly different opinion than us. And then, there was a presidential election, and that wasn't divisive at all, right? So we just really, really got out of practice. We got out of practice in the art of disagreement, and that is difficult because when we came back to the workplace, we had forgotten a lot of it. And our workplaces looked very different, didn't they? The world had changed, our workplaces had changed, and yet our employees, and perhaps even ourselves, didn't have as much of the skill as we did in terms of having those challenging conversations. We know that it's always been a part of a workplace leader's job to deal with personality clashes and warring egos and limited resources and even really tricky things like union, non-union labor. But we're kind of prepared for those. As workplace leaders, okay, I'm going to have to navigate some conflicts. That is a part of my job, obviously. You've probably had some conflict resolution training. You've probably had some experience in this. And so, you go in, it's not like you go in expecting to never face conflict. It's inevitable, it will happen, but you can manage it. But the other thing that's different for workplace leaders right now is that you are being asked to answer to things that you've never had to ask. So on the one hand, we have a workforce who is less equipped to have challenging conversations. And on the other hand, you're being asked to make statements and have a stance and respond to big national issues that would never have come into the workplace before. You think about something like reproductive rights and when the Supreme Court made the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. 40 years ago, the idea of that even being a potential discussion in the workplace, forget about it. How inappropriate. Can't believe you would talk about that here. Now, CEOs are being asked, what's our stance? We have employees in this state and they don't have access to that care. What are we going to do to support them? We need to make a public stance about this. It is a whole new level of pressure, and we have to rise to it. It's not going anywhere. This is where we are right now. And so we're figuring out how to navigate some of these conversations and support our teams. And I love the concept of coach that Gary talks about. Coach our teams through these times. We know this is costing us. So we know from data that conflict itself costs about $359 billion in paid hours lost. Time that is spent dealing with conflict annually. And that equates to about 385 million working days lost in this country due to dealing with conflict. And on average, a manager or a coach spends about 6 hours a week resolving conflict in some way or another. That's a lot of time. And so if we're spending so much time involved in conflict, how is it that we still feel sort of unprepared sometimes to handle it when it comes up? That's something that we are asked all the time at NCRC. And so what I'll spend the rest of my time talking about with you today is a few really practical tips and ideas that you can take back with you and add to your toolbox, because I recognize that everyone here has experience in this and has training in this and has probably some amazing skills to add to what we're talking about. But I want to look at a couple of things that can be relevant to us today to really help us move forward when these conversations present themselves. So the first thing I want to look at is that one thing we don't often consider is that there are two levels to any conflict. The first is the conflict, right? The issue itself, whatever that issue is. But the second is often overlooked. The second is how we respond to it. When we are in conflict, we all take on a certain communication style. And we're going to look at what those are. But we also all make a very grave assumption. And that assumption is that whoever we're in conflict with will respond the way we would respond. And when they don't, we level up, right? The whole thing escalates. Because I feel a certain way about something, I'm going to do this thing about it, and while I expect that you may oppose me, I also expect that you're having that same response. Well, that's not true. So we have to really, really consider our communication styles in conflict. So we look at the work of Dr. Mitchell Hammer, and these are communication styles specifically in disagreement. So this is when, and we have to remember this is not our communication style normally. This is our communication style when our body has kicked into survivor mode, that fight, flight, or freeze mode, where we are trying to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to handle this conversation. So there are 4 communication styles here, and as I go through them, I'd like for you to think a little bit about which one is yours in conflict. And a lot of people tell me, I have 2. I have one in the workplace and then one at home, right? And that's fair, and that's very true for most of us. What I want you to do for the purpose of thinking about it here is think about in the workplace. Think about your role and your communication style in the workplace. So the first is discussion style. If you are discussion style, you are a direct communicator, but you're pretty emotionally restrained. That means that when an issue pops up, you are likely to address it quickly, present the facts, and be ready for problem solving pretty quickly, okay? So discussion style, direct communicator, but more emotionally held back. If you're engagement style, you're also a direct communicator. You probably want to address the issue more quickly than not, but you're also going to talk about how the issue has impacted you. You're going to bring the F word feelings. You're going to bring, but not in a bad way. I mean, this can be done very professionally, but your natural state is to not only talk about the issue, but to talk about the impact it's had on you and what you've seen the impact be. So it doesn't mean you're overly emotional, right? It just means you're able to kind of talk about that part of it. Now, if you are accommodation style, you're more of an indirect communicator. You probably need some time to process what's happened. You're probably going to look for any solution you can before that face-to-face conversation. Try to figure out, is there another way to resolve this that I can figure out, right? And you're probably pretty poker face about it. It would be very hard for people around you to even know that something else is going on. And then finally, if you're a dynamic style, you're also going to be more of an indirect communicator. You need time to process. You're, again, looking for solutions that maybe don't even bring in the other person. But you're impacted, and it is obvious. And there are ways that that kind of shows up. I have a really good friend, and he's dynamic style, and he gets these emails from this supervisor of his, and this is not at my company. And he gets these emails from this supervisor of his that is not a good coach and is constantly piling on work that's unfair for him. And he tells me that the way his little jab is whenever he signs an email, kind regards, he's like, that's like my middle finger. So, it's like nobody would know that, but that's just like his little way of being very indirect about it. But if you know that, you're like, something's going on with him, So think about yourself. Think about what style you have in conflict. And there are no wrong styles. There's not a quiz at the end of this that goes, good job, discussion style, you win at all. So think just truly about what your style is. And I want to spend a few minutes kind of diving into these styles. So I'm going to have you pair off because these conversations aren't going to take too long, but pair off with someone at your table. And if you have an odd number, 3 is fine. And we're going to look at 3 questions, but one at a time. So each question's only going to be a couple of minutes of discussion, and then I have already learned so much, as I said. I learned a lot from the incomparable Scott Blanchard, and I'm going to do the raise the hand trick. So if you weren't here yesterday, I'm going to raise my hand when it's time to kind of come back, and if you could also raise your hand and stop your discussion, we'll get to the next question. Does that work for everyone? All right, perfect. So the first question, and pair off with someone for just a couple of minutes, is I want you to talk about what are the strengths of your style. And I'll put the styles back up. Now, this question is not, what are all the things wrong with all the other styles? Okay? I really want you to focus on what are the strengths of your style. All right? And I will give you just a couple of minutes to talk about that with your partner. Scott, my hat's off to you. This is brilliant. Love it. All right, next question. Couple minutes with your same partner. How do you want people to show respect to your style? I'll give you 2 minutes. Sorry. Thank you so much. Final question. How can you show respect to other styles? Considering your style, you now know what it is and what strengths you have. You know how you need to be shown respect in these moments. How can you demonstrate and show respect to other styles? I'll give you a couple minutes. Can you get my Thank you, sir. This is one of those conversations I feel like could go on all day, right? How many of you, I'm curious, ended up pairing off with someone who had a different style than you do? Wonderful. I love it when that happens. Because I find with these three questions that it's really fun to answer the first two. You almost kind of feel this validation of, yes, and my style needs to be respected, and it is important. And then, oh yeah, I need to do this for others too. And in practice, great, sounds pretty simple, but very hard to do. Because our expectations, and again, we have to remember, our brain is in survival mode in moments of conflict. It is not often thinking rationally. And so to be able to take a minute and think about this concept of styles and recognize, is the person across from me, or if you find yourself kind of helping resolve conflict between others, are they having a style issue difference here that I can help work through? That gets us so much closer to resolution, because the issue itself a lot of the times is solvable, but it's the assumptions that we have about the other that create this barrier to thoughtful problem solving. And so just even recognizing this, whether it's yourself or you're helping team members kind of recognize this, can be a critical first step. And you have to practice it. Our brains need to be exercised like a muscle in our body. You have to practice it when you're not in conflict, so that when you're surprised by it, because most of us are not putting on our shoes in the morning going, I bet you that conflict comes up today. It usually just kind of walks into our office, and our brains, our muscles have to be ready to respond. We call it in one of our trainings, we call this active awareness. Right? And we call it that because in that moment of being confronted with something, you have to be aware of so many things, style differences, bias that you carry. And the other thing we talk about in our training is how you're going to let go of your ego during the conversation to get to the end goal, right? So again, think about this. I literally do it in the car. I literally think about it, and I'll be listening to the news. and I'll pretend, what if I was talking to that person, that pundit I'm hearing that is just driving me crazy? But how would I have a conversation with them? What would that look like? And that's the practice piece, right? When I'm not in a heated state so that I can respond better when I am. Conflict styles are huge. The other thing that I want to talk about today is impacting the workplace so significantly, and I know so because it's come up in probably 4 other speeches that I've heard over the last day and a half. And that is the fact that there are currently 5 generations in one workforce right now. Yeah, it's huge. It's impacting our workplaces so much, and in such positive ways, but there's a lot of challenges with it too, right? And so basically, we know that we have the silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, all in the same workplace. So there are still people from the silent generation that are in the workforce. And there's a number of reasons for that. Some of them are running for president. But there are a lot of reasons for this, right? We've talked about the impact of the recession. There are people who have to work a lot longer than they ever planned on. There are also people who love what they do, and that's a wonderful thing. But they're in the workforce with individuals who 9/11 is a history quote to them. They weren't alive for it. They're learning about it in textbooks. And so that's a big, big gap. And so we think about, and we have to pay a lot of attention to generational differences, because when harnessed correctly, you can have a thriving workforce that pulls from the benefits of all 5 generations. When ignored or brushed over or not talked about, it can create a lot of conflict on teams, and people's intelligence and experience becomes underutilized and not harnessed because they feel quieted, right? The other thing I want to say about generations, and I'd love for you to all think about which generation that you're in, is that we cannot make sweeping assumptions or statements about any of them. I just recently did a webinar with a brilliant woman named Dr. Megan Gerhardt. She wrote the book Gentelligence, and I highly recommend it if you haven't heard of it or read it yet. But it's all about these different generations working together in the workforce. And we talked about the fact that within each of these generations, there are very specific defining characteristics that come out of certain decades or periods of years. I'll tell you about myself. I fall between Gen X and millennial. I'm not going to tell you exactly which one I fall into, but that would be the categorization of myself, and I reject that completely. I fall into what I refer to, and what I've read about referred to as the Oregon Trail generation. It's also called Xennials. And there's this group of us with kind of this 6-year window that really don't feel like Gen Xers, really don't feel like millennials. And the reason why is because we grew up with this analog childhood, digital young adulthood. We traveled with the internet as it rose. I learned cursive, and I turned in assignments on cursive. When I was learning how to type, it was on a typewriter. And I'm so glad I did learn it, but there was a lot of my peers who didn't, right? We didn't know that was a skill that was going to be needed. I went to the library and knew the Dewey Decimal System and looked up books that way. I was also part of a group of people who were criticized heavily in college because we were using this thing called the internet for some research, and it was totally untrusted. It reminds me so much of how we're looking at AI right now. There's this totally just new frontier, and that can't be correct information, right? I went to school without a computer. Like, this is a crazy thought, right? My car broke down on the side of the road, and you know what I did? I walked to a what? A call box. On the freeway. Like, I walked to a, so this defines me. This is a huge part of my identity. Not Gen X, not millennial. And so we also have to be very careful when we look at generations in our workplaces not to do what Dr. Gerhardt's called lazy stereotypes. And we put each other in these boxes where we assume we know why someone is behaving a certain way based on their generation or really any other surface level difference about them. So I want to have just another brief discussion at your table and look at two questions with you. Hopefully you took some time to think about which generation you kind of fall into. And the first question that I want you to discuss at your table is, what factors contributed to the shaping of your generation? And I want to go even a little bit deeper. What factors contributed to how you identify your generation? So for me, that was kind of this exennial Oregon Trail generation. So even a little deeper, you may be sitting at a table or talking to someone who's technically in the same generation for you, and this answer may look really different for both of you. So talk about that for just a couple of minutes. My mic is hot.
Oregon Trail generation because you played it in elementary or what?
Yeah, because it was like the first video game. I just got asked such a good question that was obvious to me, but maybe not. The Oregon Trail generation. Does everyone know what that refers to? The Oregon Trail game? Yeah, we got some excitement back there. Yes. If you were an Oregon Trail generation person, you are living that excitement right now as we talk about it. It was the first computer game available. And oh my gosh, you would play it like for hours, and these little pixelated caravans of people would like cross rivers, and you'd lose cows, and I mean, it was great. Yeah. So, all right, so you just spent some time thinking about what factors contributed to the shaping of your generation. My final question for you to discuss, and then we're going to talk about it as a group, is what are your perceptions of other generations in the workplace? And again, you're probably sitting with some other generations at your table. And so the good, the bad, the tough, what are your perceptions and your experience with other generations in the workplace? I'll give you about 4 minutes so we stay on track. I know it's like a 50-minute conversation, but do your best 4 or 5 minutes and then I'll bring you back. All right, thank you. So I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many of you learned something new at your table in the last few minutes? Yeah, love group thought. I'm also curious, how many of you have ever felt that you have experienced a bias towards you based on your age or generation? Almost all of us. That doesn't surprise me at all. It probably doesn't surprise any of us, right? And that can apply if you are in an older generation, if you're middle-aged, if you are brand new to the workforce. So one of the things that we think about is that it doesn't matter what generation you are from. There are universal needs we all have. We all want to be respected, right? We all want to feel part of community. And so when we think about our differences and that how we approach things may be wildly different from another person of a different generation, we remember that at the root of that is a need for respect, belonging, right? Feelings of accomplishment and job satisfaction. And so we kind of return to a place where we look at that to say, all right, if that's the goal, we can meet that goal. We can do that. We don't have to overcome all the differences that we have. We're going to have different approaches to things, but we can stay laser focused on that goal. And the reason I bring up generational differences and our communication style differences is that one thing we have to be so aware of in conflict is our bias. And I specifically want to look at confirmation bias. Because confirmation bias is that piece of our brain that excludes like 90% of the information we know about a person and focuses on the 10% we believe confirms everything we need to know about them. And for years, we will look for the things that continue to confirm that fact about them, and it makes it very difficult to work with them. And you've probably seen this on your teams. You see two smart individuals who could work together, but they are just constantly looking for the things that confirm their belief about the other person not being a good coworker, not being a good team player, whatever that is. And so we think about, when we look at confirmation bias, one exercise I always like to do when I catch myself is think about the bias I'm holding, and then think of an opposite positive. So the millennial or Gen Zer that won't answer my phone call, but will text me back, and I really want to have a phone conversation about something really quickly, is the same person who saved our company during COVID and moved us all to Zoom and moved us all to virtual, right? And so these pieces, this is a good practice for us all, is what bias am I holding in this moment, this thing that's frustrating me? How can I find a quality about that that is positively impacting me? From there, that helps me just take a step back, just be aware that I have it. Doesn't mean we agree on everything. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the ability to get to a space where we can move forward together and again, figure out that art of disagreement again. The art of being able to have opposing views and ideas come to the same table and be a constructive conversation instead of one that we're all running away from as quickly as we can. I kind of want to leave you with this thought, and that's that there are 5 universal truths about people. The first, people want to be treated with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what your background is, your education, how much money you have, the color of your skin. You want to be treated with dignity and respect. We must remember that. Even when dealing with someone who seems immensely ignorant, doesn't know truth, is coming at you, so whatever that is, remember this fact about them. They want to be treated with dignity and respect. They may not be doing that to you, but that is something that they want. If you can meet them there, you have a better chance of being heard and hearing them. People would always rather be asked than told what to do, right? We know that a great quality in a leader is being able to bring in your team and ask them for their input, get their buy-in, rather than just saying, here's how we're going to resolve this thing. These are the new marching orders. Have a collective idea. Work together to figure out what that is, because then there will be buy-in, and people are so much more likely to stick with that agreement and stick with the outcome. People want to know why. Why am I being asked or told to do something? Okay, that policy exists. We need to come back to work 3 days a week. Very controversial, right? Return to work. We need to come back to work 5 days a week. We're staying fully remote. Every company has had to navigate this over the last couple of years. Very few have done a good job of explaining to their employees why. Why are we doing 3 days back, 2 days remote? Have that conversation. You still might not have everyone on the same page or happy with it, but at least they know why they're doing it. They know your reasoning, and hopefully why it connects to your company values. People would always rather have options rather than threats. This is actually an amazing technique with high conflict personalities. Giving people options, and as a leader, I'm gonna say sometimes you need to control those options, right? Like everything isn't on the table all the time. You have to kind of make choices, but you can bring options to the table that you are comfortable with and give people those options. And especially with high conflict personalities, this is a great technique. Also toddlers, very effective with toddlers. Same thing, maybe? No. But give people options, let them choose into it. They're gonna feel a lot better about that outcome. And finally, most people want a chance to make things right. Most of us, and I love this was talked about earlier, when we think about people who are posturing, maybe not being fully honest or fully themselves, a lot of the time that comes from a place of fear. And if we build a bridge out for people where they have an opportunity to make things right, we frequently empower them to be even better than they were before. Bouncing back from a mistake is a completely empowering experience to be able to have, but we're usually punitive and we don't give that opportunity. So make sure that as you're working with individuals and going through conflict resolution, you're building out a process for both of you, for everyone involved, to be able to have a second chance and make things right. I just want to close saying that we at the National Conflict Resolution Center are here to support you in this work. So if you scan this QR code on our website, we have an entire page of just free resources for workplace professionals. And we are just developing content constantly, looking at what's happening in national news, looking at what's going on in the world, and thinking, how is this impacting workplace leaders today? And how can we serve them better? How can we support them? Because that's our goal, that's our job. So never hesitate to reach out to us, but you can also just get these resources on your own if you want them. And again, I just want to say how honored I am to speak with you all, be here at this conference, and thank you for your time today.